Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a city wrapped in both stone and silence. You find yourself arriving at ancient Tula, where the night has already settled in and the cool air feels gentle against your skin. The fire nearby flickers with a steady rhythm, each spark rising like a thought you almost forget. The moon spills its silver glow over the carved warrior statues that stand tall, as if they have been waiting for centuries just to watch you walk past. The scene feels timeless, but also oddly cozy, like you could set up a hammock right here and somehow survive without Wi-Fi. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment with your local time and place, because I always find it fascinating how these stories connect us across so many nights and hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along the outer edge of the plaza, each step cushioned by dust that has waited almost 1,000 years. The city seems to quiet itself for you, as if even the stones have chosen to breathe in silence. The moon glows across broken walls and softened steps, revealing faint carvings that once carried the stories of gods and heroes. The stillness wraps around you, steady and patient, like a deep inhale shared between the earth and the night. One stone appears to grin at you, and you think ancient sculptors must have enjoyed their own jokes. The air carries a dry sweetness, faint yet lingering, as if traces of flowers or incense still drift across the night. You pause and imagine when drums once shook this plaza, voices rising in chants that reached toward the stars. Now only the wind remains, steady as a soft song. The silence feels rare, almost like luxury, and you smile at its calm. Beneath the shadow of a tall column, the weight of stone feels vast, like the ocean. These walls whisper of a world older than clocks, one guided by constellations. You picture countless generations gazing upward, seeking answers in the same stars. A quiet laugh escapes you as you imagine someone tripping on these same steps, joking about it, proof that humor endures as stubbornly as stone. Nearby, firelight flickers, bending shadows across the statues. For a heartbeat, helmets tilt, spears lean closer, shoulders shift, and the guardians of Tula seem to breathe. You know it is only an illusion, yet it feels intentional, a clever trick left by the sculptors. If so, their prank still succeeds after 1,000 years. Beneath your steps, the ground crunches softly, uneven but reassuring, like an old floor remembering every footstep it has ever carried. Paths carved by sandals, boots, and bare feet still guide you with ease grooves of memory, so deep that time itself cannot erase them. You glance upward. The moon rests perfectly framed between two columns, a careful design of ancient hands. The city was not hurried. It was composed like music, each stone a note placed with intention. You slow your own steps to match its rhythm, unwilling to rush through what feels like a living score. Imagine if workplaces today had mandatory pauses for moon-gazing, chaotic perhaps, but deeply refreshing. The fire crackles softly, balancing the silence so it never feels too heavy. Flames bend low and leap high, unpredictable yet always familiar. Their warmth touches your skin, while the night air stays cool, a reminder that contrasts keep life vivid: warmth against cool, shadow against glow, silence against sound. If existence offered only one flavor, even chocolate would eventually beg for a holiday. You continue deeper into the heart of Tula. The city feels vast, though softened by time. Its stones carry patience, telling stories only to those who move slowly enough to listen. You feel yourself becoming part of that quiet procession, your breath and steps folded into centuries of memory. It is like walking through a library where silence is filled with turning pages. Somewhere in that hush, you imagine the city chuckling at the idea of alarm clocks. You rest your hand on a low wall, its surface cool, softened by countless touches. Many paused here before you, in prayer, in laughter, or simply catching breath. The wall has absorbed all those moments and welcomes another without judgment. If walls could gossip, this one might ask for a nap first. An owl calls softly across the plaza, its steady voice carrying through the night. You glance upward and find it perched above, tiny flames reflected in its round eyes. Even here, the creatures feel like guardians, folded into Tula's memory. If owls offered advice, this one might suggest you finally go to bed on time. The breeze stirs, cool from the distant river, brushing the stone edges until the sound almost forms words. You lean closer, half convinced the city is whispering. The voice is faint, yet it carries weight, as though secrets still linger in the corridors. Perhaps this is why ancient travelers spoke of living cities. Nature never stopped speaking. It was people who grew louder. You picture merchants spreading goods, children darting among pillars, priests arranging flowers. Now the plaza rests in silver moonlight, quiet as a theater after the play. The stars shine above, steady and patient, as if they have been waiting for this silence. Fire, moon, and starlight once painted the city in moving shadows, a dance of light that must have felt like music. You smile, imagining them twinkling at the thought of flashlights. Carefully, you step down a worn stairway into a small courtyard. The stones are smooth from countless footsteps, lives once gathered here with purpose. The walls stand faded yet graceful, holding quiet dignity. A faint carving of a serpent clings to the stone, weathered but unyielding. From this angle, it almost looks as if it wears sunglasses, a detail both playful and endearing. You inhale slowly, matching the city's calm rhythm. Time feels unhurried, stretched wide and gentle, inviting rest. Stones, shadows, and whispers seem to murmur as one. Be still, listen closely, and allow the burdens of the world to quietly fall away. You climb the last few steps and arrive at the summit of the pyramid. The air feels thinner up here, sharper, as if the height itself demands your full attention. For a moment, you stand still, not because you are out of breath, but because something ahead commands silence. 4 colossal figures rise before you, their stone bodies bathed in silver moonlight. They do not move, and yet the plaza below feels smaller, quieter, almost as though the entire city has shifted its gaze upward with you. Each warrior stands 4.6 meters tall, taller than most houses in the modern world. Their helmets stretch high, carved with intricate patterns, while square shields press against their sides. In their hands they carry weapons of stone, shapes that blur the line between spear, dart thrower, and some tool lost to time. You tilt your head, squinting a little, trying to imagine what it must have been like when artisans first set hammer to stone. How much patience does it take to carve a figure taller than a bus without accidentally giving it lopsided shoulders? Whoever they were, they succeeded. The warriors stand symmetrical, proud, and eerily alive. The moonlight highlights their faces, stern, unblinking, carved with an authority that does not fade even after centuries. Their eyes do not stare at you, but past you, fixed on horizons only they seem to understand. Perhaps that was the point, to remind mortals that vision extends beyond the ordinary. You feel a ripple of humility, the same kind you get when looking at a mountain or a stormy sea. Except here, the mountains were made by human hands, and yet they feel just as eternal. You wonder what these figures meant to the people of Tula. Some scholars argue they represent elite warriors, guardians of the city who stood watch long after their human counterparts were gone. Others believe they are gods, embodiments of divine protection. Still others suggest they may be astronomical markers, aligned with the rising and setting of stars, their forms echoing the patterns of constellations. Standing here, you find that none of these explanations cancel the others out. The statues seem to invite all meanings, as if their purpose was not to answer, but to expand imagination. If they could talk, they might simply shrug and say, Why not all three? A breeze crosses the summit, cool against your skin, and the warriors seem even taller, as if the wind itself bends around their forms. Shadows fall down their carved armor, revealing details you had not noticed before. Feathered headdresses, belts adorned with geometric symbols, sandals strapped firmly to their feet. The craftsmanship is precise, but not mechanical. You can sense the human hand in every line, the intention to create something both familiar and otherworldly. You smile at the thought that somewhere in the middle of carving, one artisan must have muttered, "No pressure, just shaping a god." The longer you stand before them, the more your perspective shifts. At first, you see soldiers frozen in time. Then, you notice their serenity. These are not warriors caught mid-battle, but guardians at rest, content in their vigilance. You imagine what it would be like to walk past them each day, to grow up under their watchful eyes. Would you feel safe or small, or simply used to their presence, the way we grow blind to skyscrapers in our cities? Perhaps the people of Tula felt all of these things at once. The night sky adds its own commentary. Stars glitter above the warriors' helmets, as if crowning them with a light only the heavens can provide. You tilt your head, aligning one figure with the constellation Orion. The resemblance is uncanny stone shoulders mirroring celestial ones. Could it be coincidence? Or perhaps the Toltec were mapping the heavens onto stone, ensuring their gods and guardians stood in dialogue with the sky. Ancient architects loved alignment, and you realize this pyramid might have been less of a stage and more of a telescope carved from Earth itself. Still, the mystery lingers. Why four? Why this size? Why here, at the top of the pyramid of Luis Calpanto, the temple, dedicated to the Lord of the Morning Star? You sense that the figures are less about answers and more about thresholds. Climbing the pyramid was not just a physical act, but a spiritual one. By the time someone reached the summit, they would stand face to face with beings larger than life, reminders that the world of stone and the world of stars were never separate. If staircases were prayers, these warriors were the response. Your eyes drift once more to their weapons. At first glance, they look practical tools for defense, but linger, and they seem abstract, almost symbolic. Were they real weapons or metaphors, signs of power that transcended violence? You imagine one warrior turning to you and saying, "Relax, it's more about symbolism." Somehow, that feels right. These are not statues of aggression, but of permanence, reminders that strength is not only in striking, but in standing, decade after decade, century after century, refusing to fall. A faint laugh escapes you as you notice how one shadow falls oddly across a helmet, making it look like the warrior is wearing a lopsided hat. It is strangely comforting to realize even monuments can play tricks on the eye. You imagine the ancient sculptors sharing a private chuckle at how moonlight would one day make their work wink. History, it seems, always leaves room for humor. You step back and let the scene settle around you. Four giants against the night sky, stone breathing under silver light, silence woven with wind and fire. Whatever their true meaning, you realize they have succeeded in their purpose. They make you stop. They make you listen. They make you wonder. And perhaps that is enough. Not every mystery was meant to be solved. Some were meant to be lived. Below, the city lies asleep in its blanket of shadows. Above, the stone warriors remain on watch, their gaze anchored in eternity. Yet tonight, for a fleeting moment, you stand among them, not as an intruder, but as a quiet guest in their eternal audience. You exhale, steady and slow, and let yourself join their vigil, if only for a moment. If monuments had guest books, you would sign your name with nothing but silence. You approach another structure, its outline softened by distance, yet impossible to ignore. The pyramid of Quetzalcoatl rises before you, tiered and deliberate, every stone carrying the weight of centuries. The night has settled deeper now, and the stars above seem to gather in clusters, as though they too lean closer to watch. At the base of the pyramid, the air grows hushed, not in fear, but in respect. You feel it immediately. This was once the heart of ceremony, the place where people gathered with offerings, prayers, and hopes woven into chants. The first step greets you with a thin veil of dust, soft underfoot, but steady in its foundation. These stairs are not rushed. They invite you upward at a pace that matches the breath. Each rise is shallow but wide, as if reminding you to take your time. You imagine the countless feet that once climbed here, priests in elaborate headdresses, dancers adorned with feathers, families carrying gifts of maize and flowers. Each footstep carried intention, a rhythm of devotion carved into stone. Tonight you walk in silence, but the stones still seem to echo with those layered memories. Your hand brushes against the edge of the stairway, rough but reassuring. Carvings peek out from the surface, not in bold relief, but as whispers etched into history. Feathered serpents curl along the stone, their bodies winding in intricate patterns that catch moonlight in unexpected ways. The lines are elegant, deliberate, and unervingly precise. You pause and trace one coil with your eyes, following the serpent as it twists upward. For a moment, you imagine the scales shifting, alive with motion, as if the serpent has simply chosen to pause mid-breath. If snakes could wink, this one probably just did. The symbolism is unmistakable. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wind and learning, life and renewal. His presence marks this temple as more than stone. It is a stage where myths became action, where rituals shaped the rhythm of the city. You can almost hear the sound of conch shells and drums, not as noise, but as heartbeat, carrying prayers into the open sky. Standing here, you realize how ceremony was not only for the gods, but for the people themselves. To gather, to breathe together, to move as one body beneath the stars, that was its own form of eternity. Yet the mystery lingers in the carvings. Some scholars suggest the coils of Quetzalcoatl may not be merely decorative. The curves, they argue, align with constellations, a map hidden in feathers and scales. You look up again, letting your eyes drift from stone to sky. The resemblance is startling. The serpent's body curling like the Milky Way, its head pointing toward the bright shimmer of Venus. Could it be coincidence? Or did the Toltecs sculpt their god as both protector and guide, bridging the earth and heavens in one body of stone? If ancient engineers invented PowerPoint, this pyramid would have been their slide deck. You continue climbing, each step a small ritual of its own. The higher you go, the quieter the world below becomes, until only the wind and your breath remain. Shadows stretch long across the stairs, wrapping around your legs like silent companions. Somewhere in the distance, another owl calls, its voice carrying like a low question. You wonder if the priests once listened for the same sound, taking it as omen or blessing. Tonight, it feels like encouragement, a reminder that ascent is not only physical, but also inward. Reaching the upper platform, you pause again. The view stretches outward, revealing the city's bones beneath the moon. Plazas, columns, and walls form a pattern that seems deliberate, like the arrangement of words in a prayer. From here, the feathered serpents carved below look like they are rising into the stars, as though the pyramid itself is mid-transformation, half earth and half sky. The effect is dizzying, but not in a fearful way, more like leaning into music that lifts you gently off the ground. You imagine the ceremonies once held here. Priests standing at this very height, their voices raised not in domination, but in dialogue with the cosmos. Firelight flickering against the carvings, smoke spiraling upward until it disappeared into the same constellations the serpents seemed to echo. The people below would have lifted their faces, eyes shimmering with faith, as if the entire city breathed as one. In that unity, there was power not of conquest, but of connection. Even now, centuries later, the air holds a trace of that resonance. The mystery deepens as you consider the serpent's duality. Feathered yet scaled, earthbound yet sky-reaching. It embodies opposites without contradiction. Perhaps that is why it still feels relevant, even in a modern world of contradictions. To walk these steps is to step into paradox, to accept that meaning can be layered, shifting like the stars. You exhale slowly, realizing the lesson is not in solving, but in experiencing. If temples offered philosophy courses, this one would simply say, be both. A gust of wind rushes across the summit, lifting your hair and cooling your skin. You glance back at the stairs, their lines falling sharply into shadow. For a moment, they resemble a path not downward but outward, stretching toward infinity. The thought brings a smile. You realize the temple has been whispering all along, not in words, but in the rhythm of stone and sky. You were never meant to climb only upward. You were meant to see both directions at once. You stand quietly, letting the night settle around you. The carvings remain still, the stars remain patient, and the pyramid continues its silent vigil. Whatever secrets lie in the coils of Quetzalcoatl, they are not rushed. They will wait, as they always have, for those willing to climb, to pause, to listen. You place your palm on the final stone, cool and steady, and feel a strange gratitude. Not for answers, but for the chance to be part of the question. If the old temples could speak in a language you understood, their message would be simple. Slow down, lift your eyes, breathe. They would remind you that you are not just passing through, but already woven into their story. Every step you take here becomes another line written quietly into the long memory of stone and sky. The horizon begins to soften, and a pale light stretches gently across the land. You stand among the stones of Tula, watching as shadows dissolve into morning. The first rays of sunlight slide across the statues and stairways, painting them gold for a fleeting moment. It feels as though the city itself is exhaling after a long night, welcoming the warmth of a new day. In this glow, you can almost sense the centuries when dawn carried more than light. It carried the promise of a rising empire. You picture the people of Tula waking to mornings like this. Smoke drifting from hearths, families preparing food, merchants arranging their wares for trade. The air would have been filled with sounds that felt ordinary then, but seem extraordinary now. The crackle of firewood, the laughter of children chasing each other through courtyards, the hum of conversation between neighbors. Each note combined into the melody of a city alive, a community building toward greatness. You smile at the thought that someone surely grumbled about mornings even then, proving that not much has changed in 1,000 years. The Toltec rise is described as steady rather than sudden. Unlike storms that sweep across landscapes, their influence grew with patience, like a river carving stone. From around the 10th century, Tula became a hub of culture, governance, and belief. By the 11th and 12th centuries, the city stood as the pinnacle of Toltec power. Its plazas and temples welcomed thousands. Its artisans shaped beauty from stone and metal, and its warriors held influence across vast stretches of central Mexico. The city's reach was not only military, but also spiritual, as its deities and traditions spread far beyond its walls. Yet, as you stand in this quiet dawn, you cannot help but wonder, where did it all begin? The origins of the Toltec remain cloaked in mystery. Some accounts suggest they emerged from the north, carrying traditions from older civilizations. Others propose they were always here, woven into the fabric of central Mexico, long before history could pin their name to a page. Archaeologists have found traces but not certainty, stories but not final answers. You realize history sometimes prefers to keep its introductions vague, like a shy actor who suddenly steps onto the stage already mid-performance. The mystery does not diminish their rise, it enhances it. To imagine a people who appeared in strength, building a city of such grandeur, feels almost mythic. Their arrival, whether gradual or sudden, left an imprint strong enough to shape the cultures that followed. The Aztec, centuries later, would look back at the Toltec as models of wisdom and refinement. To be called Toltec became a compliment, a way of saying someone was skilled, wise, or noble. Even in mystery, the Toltec managed to brand themselves with enduring respect. If ancient civilizations had marketing teams, this would have been their finest campaign. The morning sun continues to climb, casting longer beams across the plaza. You imagine how ceremonies must have unfolded under this light, priests arranging offerings of flowers, feathers, and incense at the base of the pyramids. The people gathered in quiet reverence, their eyes lifted to the same sun now brushing against your skin. Dawn would not only mark the day's beginning, but also affirm the city's place in the rhythm of cosmos. To live in Tula was to live within a pattern that felt larger than individual lives. The city was both home and symbol, rooted in stone, yet aimed at the stars. As morning light spreads, you see how the city's architecture carries two purposes at once. The walls are practical, steady in their task of holding weight and shaping space. Yet they also lift the gaze toward something higher. Columns stand firm, but their carvings draw the eye into myth and memory. Each structure seems determined to be both functional and poetic, never one without the other. You begin to understand that this balance may have been the city's secret strength. The Toltec did not divide sacred from ordinary life. They bound them together. Every stone placed, every step taken, every sunrise witnessed became part of a seamless rhythm where utility and reverence shared the same breath. The Toltec rise was not only about buildings and rituals. It was about influence, political, cultural, and spiritual. From Tula, their reach extended across valleys and highlands, touching communities near and far. Trade carried their goods to distant regions, and stories of their gods and rulers traveled with them. To neighboring peoples, the Toltec represented more than power. They represented refinement. Their art, their order, and their myths became points of admiration, imitated and adapted in countless ways. It is no wonder later generations looked back at them, like we might look back at a golden age of literature or music. If playlists existed then, Toltec chants would have been top hits. Still, the question of their origin lingers, like a whisper you almost catch but never fully hear. Some traditions describe migrations guided by divine visions, while others suggest gradual blending with older cultures. The truth remains hidden beneath layers of stone and silence, but perhaps that is fitting. Every empire, no matter how great, carries mystery in its roots. To know everything would be to strip away the wonder, and history seems determined to keep a little wonder for itself. As the sun reaches higher, the city glows. Shadows shorten, details sharpen, and every carving becomes more visible. You stand quietly, letting the light settle on your face, feeling the same warmth that touched the people of Tula centuries ago. In this moment, the rise of the Toltec does not feel distant. It feels present, as though the morning has folded time and placed you alongside them. You breathe deeply, recognizing that while their beginnings may remain uncertain, their impact is undeniable. You take one more step into the plaza, your shadow stretching beside you. Around you, the ruins hold steady, their silence rich with stories. The calm rise of the Toltec was not about sudden conquest, but about steady creation, about weaving culture and meaning into every part of life. As you exhale, you realize the lesson is clear. Greatness does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it emerges like dawn, quiet, patient, and inevitable. And if the sun had an alarm clock, it probably snoozed a few times before showing up too. The night deepens, and the stars shine brighter, as though preparing for a story older than the stones themselves. You pause at the base of a carved wall, where feathers and scales intertwine in stone reliefs that curve gracefully across the surface. The figure is unmistakable. Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, a being of paradox and harmony. He is part bird, part snake, part myth, part memory. To the Toltec, he was more than decoration. He was a guiding presence, a god who embodied knowledge, creation, and the renewal of life itself. You take in the details, letting your eyes follow the long body of the serpent as it twists into patterns that almost feel alive. Feathers spread like wings, suggesting flight and freedom, while scales ground him in the earth, steady and enduring. He is not one or the other. He is both. Perhaps that is why he feels so familiar, because human life itself often hovers between opposites, between earth and sky, hope and doubt, silence and laughter. If philosophers had designed mascots, this one would win by a landslide. Quetzalcoatl was never just a carved figure on stone walls. He was the heart of Toltec spiritual life. Ceremonies honored him, songs rose in his name, and prayers were carried toward his unseen domain. To the Toltec, he was the god of wind, of knowledge, and of the morning star. His presence lived in the whisper of breezes scattering seeds, in the wisdom preserved through stories, and in the bright spark of Venus at dawn. To walk in his shadow was to live within a vision of balance, renewal, and continuity. Over the centuries, his influence only deepened. The Aztec would adopt him as one of their most revered deities, weaving his image into myths, rituals, and daily devotion. Temples rose high in his honor, banners bore his symbols, and codices recorded his name in brilliant colors. Quetzalcoatl transcended time and culture, remembered not as a god of fear, but as a guide of wisdom. You could almost imagine priests addressing their people, reminding them that knowledge was holy, that even the breath of the wind could carry truths weightier than stone. Amid this deep reverence rests a mystery that has long fascinated historians. Some accounts portray Quetzalcoatl not solely as a god, but as a man, perhaps priest, king, or both, who once walked the streets of Tula. Known as Tepiltzin Quetzalcoatl, he was remembered as a wise ruler who encouraged learning, fostered art, and resisted the darker demands of blood sacrifice. His reign, marked by vision and restraint, eventually ended in departure. Legends whisper that he journeyed eastward, promising to return. Myth or man, the boundary dissolves, like smoke drifting into the night. You let that thought settle in, realizing how often humanity blurs divinity with humanity. Great leaders sometimes become legends, and legends often take on divine forms. If people today can argue endlessly about whether a celebrity is iconic, imagine them. Debates when someone embodied wisdom itself. Perhaps the god and the king are inseparable, two sides of the same coin, one carved in stone, the other etched in memory. If historians had group chats, the arguments would still be pinging in the middle of the night. The mystery adds depth to the carvings before you. When you trace the serpent's coils, are you honoring a god who breathed life into wind and star? Or are you remembering a ruler who sought to lift his people with knowledge and peace? The answer may never be final, and perhaps it was never meant to be. The power lies not in choosing, but in holding both possibilities at once, just as Quetzalcoatl himself embodies contradictions without conflict. A breeze stirs the silence, moving across your skin like a quiet hand. You think of how the Toltec may have felt this same wind, believing it to be the breath of Quetzalcoatl, a subtle reminder of his nearness. The rustle of grass, the shift of leaves, the gentle touch of air, all became sacred when understood as his presence. In a world without engines or electricity, wind was not just weather. It was life itself. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the air brush past you, imagining it carries a fragment of his voice. If the wind could text, it would probably send emojis of feathers and snakes. The stories of Quetzalcoatl also carry lessons, whispered through generations. He was seen as a god of creation, credited with shaping humanity itself from the bones of earlier worlds, mixed with his own blood. That sacrifice was not of destruction, but of generosity, offering life so that life could continue. In that myth, he becomes not a distant ruler, but an intimate companion, woven into the very breath of human existence. To breathe, to learn, to rise with the morning star, these were acts of devotion, whether people realized it or not. The stars above shimmer faintly, as if nodding to his role as guide. Venus, his symbol, often appears as the brightest star at dawn, signaling change, renewal, and direction. You tilt your head and wonder how many Toltec eyes once followed that same light, trusting it to connect them to their god. It is comforting to think that a celestial body millions of miles away could unite people across centuries. If planets had fan clubs, Venus would have had the longest line for autographs. Stepping back from the carving, you feel the layered legacy of Quetzalcoatl, both myth and memory, both god and man, both feather and scale. His essence lingers not only in carved stone, but also in enduring ideas, a quiet reminder that wisdom often transcends form. The Toltec may have walked these plazas with devotion to his divinity, while modern historians sift through fragments, searching for traces of his humanity. Perhaps both truths coexist, each adding depth to the whisper of his name. You glance once more at the serpent winding along the wall, its feathers shimmering faintly under moonlight. The stone does not move, yet it feels alive, as if breathing softly beside you. Quetzalcoatl remains a symbol of balance, of knowledge as sacred, of mystery offering peace. Whether deity or king, myth or man, his presence still guides those willing to pause and listen. And if serpents truly flew, they might request extra legroom on the plain. The morning sun filters softly through the air, painting the stones of Tula in shades of gold and amber. As you wander deeper into the ruins, you begin to notice details that might escape a hurried glance. Smooth walls bear patterns so delicate they seem to whisper with every line. Sculpted columns hold up nothing now but sky, yet they still stand with elegance, as though determined to show that beauty does not vanish simply because centuries have passed. The Toltec were not only warriors and builders. They were artists, thinkers, and craftsmen. Their city was a canvas, each stone placed with intention, each carving made with precision. You imagine artisans kneeling by blocks of basalt, their hands guiding chisels, as though they were painting with stone instead of brush. Sparks might have leapt from metal tools striking hard rock, but the focus in their eyes would have been steady. In their silence and dedication, they transformed stubborn material into flowing forms, serpents, birds, warriors, gods. The art of the Toltec carried both strength and grace. Their statues of warriors, tall and commanding, were balanced by feather motifs, delicate swirls, and intricate geometric designs. It is as if they wanted to remind anyone who looked that life was not only about power, but also about refinement. Even their weaponry, forged from metal and stone, bore artistic touches, handles carved, blades polished, patterns etched. You smile at the thought that somewhere among them must have been the equivalent of a perfectionist who insisted, no, the spear must also look stylish while stabbing. Their artistry was never limited to decoration alone. Each craft carried knowledge, techniques interlaced with meaning, some of which still challenge modern understanding. Consider their skill in polishing stone until it reflected like glass. Even today, certain blocks gleam as if freshly worked, defying time. How they achieved such finishes without iron tools or machines remains uncertain. Some suggest sand and water, others abrasive mineral pastes, or perhaps methods long forgotten. The stones themselves keep silent, guarding their secrets with quiet pride. The Toltec also excelled in metallurgy. Gold, copper, and obsidian became ornaments, tools, and symbols of power. Jewelry caught the sun's brilliance, while obsidian, black and sharp as crystallized night, was carved into blades capable of striking with surgical precision. To hold one was to cradle beauty and danger intertwined, like a star cloaked in shadow. Metals and stones alike embodied more than craft. They were threads of spirituality. Rings, pendants, and ceremonial objects, more divine symbols, carrying echoes of gods and cosmic cycles into human hands. You pause before a fragment of wall where faint carvings still survive. Feathers ripple across the stone, curling around serpents that coil upward. Though weathered, the artistry remains alive, as though time has been too respectful to erase it completely. You reach out, not to touch, but to hover your hand close, feeling the coolness of the air that lingers there. In this silence, you almost hear the rhythm of tools striking stone, the murmur of voices, the heartbeat of creation echoing through the centuries. The Toltec valued not only art in form, but also art in knowledge. Their city functioned as a center of learning, where astronomy, mathematics, and ritual practice intertwined. Priests studied the skies, tracing the movement of Venus and the sun, weaving these observations into calendars that guided ceremonies and agriculture. Farmers may have relied on this knowledge to know when to sow and harvest, while rulers saw in it the timing of rituals and governance. Knowledge was practical, spiritual, and beautiful, just as their carvings were functional and poetic. Yet even with such sophistication, much remains uncertain. Some fragments suggest techniques and skills beyond what archaeologists expect from their tools. The mystery of their polished stones, the precision of their carvings, and the durability of their constructions invite speculation. Did they inherit methods from earlier civilizations? Did they invent techniques that were later lost? Or perhaps the true answer lies in patience itself, in a willingness to spend hours upon hours smoothing and carving until the stone yielded. If patience were a resource traded at markets, the Toltec would have been billionaires. Their art also carried memory. Symbols repeated across carvings, feathers, serpents, suns, and stars were not random decoration, but storytelling. Each curve told of gods. Each pattern tied humans to the cosmos. Their temples, adorned with reliefs, became books written in stone, readable by those who knew the code. To stand before them was to step into a library where silence itself was sacred. You imagine a child tugging at a parent's cloak, asking, "What does this mean?" and receiving an answer that carried both myth and astronomy. As you continue walking, you picture the workshops where artisans once gathered. The air filled with dust, the steady tapping of chisels, the glow of smelting fires, the smell of heated metal and stone. These were places of community as much as craft, where skills were shared, perfected, and passed down. The master guiding the apprentice sneaking in a personal flourish, the inevitable moment when someone dropped a tool and everyone sighed. It was all part of the rhythm of creation. Their knowledge was not locked away, but lived, breathing in every shared effort. By afternoon, the sun sharpens shadows across the plaza, and the carvings stand out more vividly. You stop, taking in how art and knowledge seem inseparable here. The Toltec did not treat beauty as luxury, but as necessity, as central to life as water or bread. Their works remind you that to create is itself a kind of prayer, an offering that lasts beyond its maker. The smoothness of stone, the shimmer of metal, the precision of carving, all speak to a devotion that was as much spiritual as technical. You breathe out slowly, sensing that in Tula, art and knowledge were never divided, but woven into one fabric. Carving a serpent meant telling a story. Polishing stone honored patience. Shaping obsidian balanced beauty with danger. Passing these skills forward allowed wisdom to flow like a river across generations. You smile at the thought. If stones can still gleam after 1,000 years, perhaps the Toltec's greatest art was not in their hands alone, but in their vision of eternity. And in any workshop contest, the stones would surely win. Night has settled over Tula again, but this time you sense a different kind of stillness. The plaza no longer feels simply abandoned. Instead, it carries an echo, as though the stones remember the rhythm of ceremonies that once unfolded beneath the stars. The sky stretches wide and clear, countless points of light flickering above, each one sharp against the darkness. It is easy to imagine this very sky reflecting in the eyes of the Toltec, guiding them, judging them, perhaps even blessing them. The heart of their spiritual life was ritual. To the Toltec, Ceremonies were not casual gatherings, but living bridges between the human world and the divine. Drums beat like heartbeats, conch shells carried voices far across the valley, and dancers circled flames until the night itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with them. At the center of it all, rituals of offering unfolded. Some were solemn, some celebratory, but all were meant to honor gods whose power shaped crops, rains, stars, and destinies. The most infamous of Toltec rites were the blood sacrifices, ceremonies described in chronicles with hearts raised high toward the heavens. To modern minds, such rituals may appear harsh or cruel, yet within Toltec belief, they carried profound meaning. Life itself was a gift from the gods, and sacrifice was understood as returning that gift in a cycle of balance. Just as the sun's rising demanded struggle and effort, so too did humanity owe its own essence to sustain the order of the cosmos. Without such offerings, they feared the rhythms of nature might falter, crops fail, or the stars drift from their paths. In this view, sacrifice was not an act of violence, but of sacred reciprocity, a contract between humans and the divine. High above, the stars bore witness silent, steady, and eternal to these acts of devotion, shimmering reminders of the Toltec belief that balance held the universe together. And yet, the story is more layered than that. Alongside evidence of blood offerings, archaeologists have found signs of gentler ritual ceremonies where no heart was taken, no life ended. Instead, flowers were arranged in careful patterns, their petals bright even in moonlight. Incense burned, its smoke curling into the sky like prayers made visible. Seeds, feathers, and precious stones were laid out as gifts, each carrying symbolic weight. Imagine the scene, the fragrance of copal resin thick in the air, blossoms scattered across stone steps, voices chanting while torches flickered. These were sacrifices too, but sacrifices of beauty, patience, and devotion. Perhaps these rituals were meant to balance the harsher offerings, reminding both gods and humans that life was not only about struggle, but also about grace. Some scholars suggest that such bloodless ceremonies were connected to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who is sometimes remembered as a god opposed to human sacrifice. If true, then these nights would have glowed not with fear, but with gentleness, as though the people whispered to the heavens, "We honor you with what is fragrant, with what blooms, with what does not bleed. You stand in the plaza, eyes lifted to the same stars that once bore witness. You imagine the drums starting deep and steady, their vibration running through the stone beneath your feet. Dancers whirl, feathers flashing, their steps tracing patterns that echo constellations above. Priests ascend the temple stairs with measured pace, torches lighting their way. The crowd gathers, hushed yet expectant, the silence of hundreds broken only by the rhythm of ritual. You can almost hear it, almost see the flicker of bodies moving in synchrony, their devotion binding them together. For the Toltec, ritual was also knowledge in action. Each step, each offering, aligned with astronomical events. Temples were positioned so that at certain times of year, the sun or Venus rose exactly where priests could mark it. Thus the ceremony was not random. It was choreography with the cosmos. To participate was to step into a living calendar, a dance that tied human life to celestial order. If Google Calendar existed back then, it would have been written in stars, not notifications. Still, the mysteries linger. How often did the gentler ceremonies occur? Were they reserved for certain gods, certain seasons, or certain communities? Did they represent a philosophical shift, a quiet rebellion against blood, or simply an alternative way to pray? The fragments we have scattered flowers fossilized into memory. Traces of incense and stone burner suggest possibilities, but no certainty. The silence of Tula holds its secrets carefully, as if the city prefers to let us wonder. The thought carries a quiet peace. Even if the exact rhythms are lost, their essence still lingers. Ritual was never only about what was offered, but how it was given. Blood, Flowers, incense, or song, each gift carried meaning because it was freely placed in the hands of the divine. What mattered was the connection, the gesture of reverence that bound human lives to cosmic cycles. Above it all, the starlit sky remained vast and constant, a silent witness, receiving devotion in every form, and reminding all that giving itself was sacred. You picture yourself sitting quietly at the edge of such a ceremony. The firelight warms your face, the stars cool your gaze. Around you, chants rise and fall, some deep and resonant, others high and trembling. The smell of burning copal mixes with the sweetness of blossoms, a strange but calming harmony. In that moment, you do not feel like an outsider, but part of a long continuum of seekers who turn to the night sky for connection. You realize that rituals, no matter how ancient, are simply ways of saying, we are small, but we are here. We are fragile, but we remember. The plaza grows quiet again in your imagination, as if the ceremony has ended. The stars remain, their silence unbroken, their patience eternal. You take a slow breath and feel a surprising comfort, as though even without drums or chants, the ritual continues in your presence alone. After all, to pause, to look up, to listen, that too is a form of offering. And if the gods enjoy humor, they are probably smiling at how humans still gather beneath the same sky, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with smoke, and sometimes with nothing more than wide, wondering eyes. The morning sun has not yet burned away the coolness of night, and you step into a part of Tula that feels softer than plazas of stone or stairways to the gods. Here, gardens stretch between courtyards, their rows carefully tended, their fragrance carried on gentle breezes. You notice maize standing tall, beans curling around supports, and squash spreading wide across the soil, the famous triad that sustained not only bodies, but entire civilizations. Between them, flowers bloom with intentional beauty, their colors no less sacred than their usefulness. It is said that even the most serious Toltec priest could pause here just to admire a blossom, then pretend he was studying agriculture. Water channels trickle nearby, guiding life through carefully laid paths. The sound is almost playful, a reminder that the Toltec knew how to tame rivers and streams, pulling them into service of both crops and people. You kneel for a moment and touch the damp edge of the canal, cool against your hand, a small miracle carved from effort and patience. For a society that honored balance between humans and gods, this mastery of water felt like a dialogue, a conversation written not in words, but in flowing currents. If irrigation systems had personalities, this one might laugh at modern sprinklers. Around these gardens, markets once pulsed with energy. Imagine stepping into the wide open square on a festival day. Stalls lined with woven mats, pottery stacked in patterns that seemed as much art as storage, jewelry glinting with turquoise and obsidian. The voices of merchants and buyers filled the air, a steady buzz of negotiation and laughter. Children darted between stalls, perhaps more interested in sweet fruit than in carved statues, while elders paused to share stories over cups of cacao. The scene was no less ceremonial than a temple ritual, except the gods being honored were taste, beauty, and daily life itself. The craftsmanship of the Toltec was renowned. Stone carvings held elegance even in the smallest household items. Metalwork glimmered with care, tools shaped for precision as much as utility. Textile makers dyed fibers in rich colors, producing cloaks that were both warm and magnificent. When you picture such a market, you realize it was more than commerce. It was a museum that breathed, a gallery where each object carried the touch of someone's devotion. Buying a pot here was like taking home a poem, only one that might also hold your dinner. Trade spread these creations far beyond Tula. Evidence shows Toltec goods reaching distant lands, their artistry admired across Mesoamerica. Obsidian blades, jade ornaments, and feathered crafts carried the name of Tula, long after voices here had fallen silent. Strangely, some items have been uncovered far into Central America, places where distance makes simple exchange hard to explain. Did traders travel that far, or did networks of allies pass items hand to hand across hundreds of miles? No one truly knows. The stones give us objects, but not itineraries, leaving the journey itself wrapped in mystery. If ancient merchants had used shipping labels, archaeologists' jobs today would be much easier. You walk slowly among ghostly rows where stalls once stood, your imagination populating them with colors, textures, and scents. One stall offers baskets woven so finely that light filters through them in playful patterns. Another holds obsidian mirrors, their surfaces black yet reflecting your face in strange shimmering detail. Farther on, a vendor displays carved figurines of eagles and jaguars, guardians of strength and spirit. The crowd presses in gently around you, not real now, but so vivid you almost hear the laughter of bargaining. The marketplace is alive again in your mind, a reminder that culture breathes strongest where people gather to share. Beyond trade, gardens anchored life here. They were not just spaces of agriculture, but of meditation and rest. Imagine a Toltec artisan leaving the noise of the marketplace to sit under the shade of a fruit tree, listening to bees hum among blossoms. These moments carried as much weight as rituals, for to appreciate beauty was to participate in the cosmic order. You sense that truth as you pause, watching how moonlight and sunlight share the same ground in quiet handover. Even weeds seem to grow politely here, as though mindful of the company they keep. You find yourself wondering what it felt like to walk home with arms full of purchases, treasures from artisans whose skill whispered of gods and patience. Did families gather at night to admire a new cloak or a finely carved bowl? Did they laugh about the price paid, promising next time to bargain better? The details are lost, but the sentiment remains universal. A marketplace is not only about objects. It is about stories carried home, stitched into daily life. If Toltec children were anything like modern ones, some probably nagged their parents for candy long before candy even existed. As you wander further, you notice how these spaces still hum with memory. The gardens have withered, the market stalls collapsed, but the layout remains like a map etched in stone. Your footsteps align with ancient pathways, grooves that guided feet for centuries. Each turn of a corner feels intentional, designed to remind the walker of balance between sustenance and celebration. Perhaps this was the real genius of Tula, not just its temples of stone, but its ability to weave sacredness into everyday life. The wind shifts, and for a moment, you imagine the scent of roasted maize drifting from a long-vanished stall. It blends with the imagined perfume of flowers, with the murmur of voices, with the laughter of children. The marketplace and gardens rise again, not in physical form, but in memory, carried across time by stones that refuse to forget. You pause to breathe it in, recognizing that this too is a ritual, a silent ceremony of imagination. To remember is to participate, to walk once more among those who came before. You leave the space slowly, your steps light, as though not to disturb the fragile balance of memory. Behind you, the gardens whisper their cycles, and the marketplace continues its timeless conversation of trade, laughter, and connection. Tula may have fallen, but in moments like these, its heart still beats softly, carried on the breeze and echoed in the dust. And somewhere, in some cosmic corner, an ancient merchant is still chuckling at the deal he managed to make on a basket of beans. You move deeper into Tula, where the air feels charged with memory, not heavy or foreboding, but tinged with the quiet dignity of stories that have traveled through centuries. Here, the whispers of myth and history blur together, and you encounter the figure of Toltec Quetzalcoatl, the ruler whose presence still lingers like fragrance carried on the wind. His name combines human authority with divine echo, and his legend weaves through the very stones beneath your feet. According to traditions, Toltec was more than just a king. He was remembered as a sage, a leader who guided his people not only with laws, but with vision. His reign was said to encourage the flourishing of arts, crafts, and learning. Under his guidance, sculptors carved stone with unmatched delicacy. Artisans wove fibers into fabrics rich with color, and storytellers refined the spoken word into lasting wisdom. It was as if his kingdom became a vast classroom, where every courtyard, garden, and plaza turned into a lesson on how to live with balance. If he had introduced exams, you imagine students would have failed happily just to hear the lectures. Again, Tepiltsin is also remembered for his resistance to bloodshed. In a world where sacrifice was common currency of devotion, he is said to have stood apart. Instead of calling for hearts torn from chests, he promoted offerings of flowers, incense, and song. Imagine ceremonies filled not with cries of fear, but with blossoms scattered across stone steps, their petals glowing under torchlight. The smoke of copal resin rising to the sky replaced the darker rituals, and chants echoed not with dread, but with reverence. To stand in such a ritual must have felt like attending a festival of beauty rather than a theater of death. This choice, however, also brought conflict. Traditions run deep, and not everyone welcomed change. Some accounts describe tension between Tepiltsin and other priests who held to older ways. Yet his legend suggests he held firm, insisting that the gods could be honored with life, not only through death. His voice might have sounded calm, yet its message was radical. To believe that devotion could be measured in blossoms rather than blood was to suggest that compassion itself might be divine. In that way, he seems startlingly modern, as though he peeked centuries ahead and whispered that kindness would one day be seen as power. Still, the lines between fact and myth remain blurred. Was Tepiltsin truly a ruler of flesh and breath, guiding the Toltec toward gentler practices? Or was he an idealized creation, a parable given form? Some historians still debate whether Tepiltsin was a real ruler or a sacred myth. The stories that survive do not come with certainty. They arrive like shadows cast by fire, shifting and suggestive. To seek him in stone inscriptions or codices is like chasing a reflection across water. It ripples away just when you think you have grasped it. Yet perhaps the uncertainty is part of his gift. Whether he existed as a man or as a story, his presence shaped the imagination of those who followed. The Aztec, centuries later, spoke of him with reverence, blending his image with that of Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent. To them, he was both king and god, human wisdom lifted into divine form. The dual identity itself may have been the point, that wisdom and compassion are so rare in leadership that when they appear, people can only explain them as divine intervention. If modern politicians were remembered this way, history books would certainly be shorter. You stand now before what might have been his palace, or perhaps only the palace that storytellers later assigned to him. Its ruins breathe in silence, walls softened by time. You imagine him walking through these halls, his cloak trailing lightly, his voice gentle as he instructed artisans, priests, or children. Perhaps he stopped in the gardens to admire flowers, reminding his people that beauty was also worthy of reverence. Or perhaps none of it ever happened, and the stones only host the echoes of a dream. Strangely, either possibility still comforts you. The legacy of Tepiltsin stretches far beyond his supposed reign, moving from the realm of history into philosophy. Stories claim he taught that life should be lived in balance, humans in harmony with nature, the gods, and each other. If he truly ruled, his time on the throne may have been brief when measured against the long current of history. Yet the memory of his teachings endured, precisely because they carried something rare, the promise of gentleness in an age often marked by blood and fear. His message suggested that wisdom and kindness could coexist with devotion. That reverence for the gods did not always require cruelty. Whether he was a man who once walked Tula's plazas, or only a mythical figure woven into legend, his presence still lingers. In the quiet of Tula's ruins, one can almost hear that voice, again a whisper reminding us that Harmony is as sacred as sacrifice. You close your eyes and picture him, feathered headdress catching firelight, his words flowing like steady rivers. Around him, people listen not out of fear but admiration, drawn into a vision of a city where knowledge, art, and compassion guide daily life. The thought is soothing, almost like listening to a lullaby shaped from stone and story. Perhaps that is why his legend persists. It comforts, it inspires, and it refuses to vanish. Even when the evidence is uncertain. As you leave the ruins behind, the stars above shine with their timeless patience. They have watched empires rise, kings fall, and myths take root, carrying no judgment, only memory. Whether Tepiltson truly walked these plazas or lived only in the imagination of his people, the result is the same. His name still drifts through Tula like a quiet echo. Tonight, you share in that echo, standing where devotion once gathered. Perhaps, if he could witness it now, he would smile at the thought of people far across the world still listening to his story, though comfortably from pillows, not the cold steps of a temple. The night air around Tula grows quiet, as though even the wind hesitates to disturb what lies in memory. You imagine yourself entering a library without shelves, without scrolls stacked neatly in rows, but one that still holds the wisdom of a people. This library belongs not to walls of stone, but to voices, images, and symbols. The silent libraries of the Toltec, where knowledge lived in rhythm, story, and paint. Long before bound books lined wooden shelves, the Toltec kept their records through codices, painted manuscripts, crafted from bark paper or deerskin, folded like concertinas of memory. These codices were not words arranged in rows, but images layered in meaning. A serpent curling across a page could speak of gods, of time, of celestial patterns. A cluster of dots might whisper of days or years. Colors carried weight, each hue loaded with symbolism. To read one was not a simple act of decoding. It was to step into a puzzle, a living story that blended art with time itself. But before codices, there was the spoken word. Around fires, elders told tales of gods and heroes, of cities rising and falling, of lessons carved not in stone, but in memory. Storytelling was a sacred act, a performance where tone and gesture mattered as much as content. Children learned history not by reciting dates, but by listening to voices that trembled, rose, and laughed. The storyteller was a guardian of knowledge, a walking book whose every pause or flourish carried generations of experience. Imagine the pressure forgetting a line might mean an entire century slips through your fingers. When codices appeared, they did not replace speech. They accompanied it. A priest or scribe would unfold the painted book before an audience, pointing to images while narrating aloud. The codex was never silent in its own time. It needed a human voice to breathe life into its colors. Picture a gathering at dusk, a manuscript spread out under torchlight, its painted figures glowing red and gold, while a voice recited the story of Quetzalcoatl's journey or the cycles of the stars. Knowledge was not merely read, it was performed, like a ritual binding past and present. From the Toltec, these traditions passed into the Aztec, who carried the practice further. Aztec codices still survive today, filled with vibrant imagery that echoes older Toltec ideas. Calendrical systems, genealogies of rulers, maps of cities all show the continuation of a visual language that was part art, part archive. Yet much of the Toltec's original contribution has been lost. Fires, wars, and time erased most of their manuscripts. Only fragments, hints, and echoes remain, like scattered pages of a once grand encyclopedia, now floating like leaves in the wind. This loss deepens the mystery. We know the Toltec influenced the Aztec, but how much? Which symbols were theirs, and which were later inventions? Historians can only guess. A handful of codices attributed to Toltec heritage offer glimpses, depictions of feathered serpents, stylized warriors, sacred calendars. Yet without full collections, interpretation is fragile. One scholar might see an astronomical chart. Another might argue from mythic allegory. It is as though the Toltec left us riddles written in bright ink, then took away the answer key. Silence, too, carries its own eloquence. Amid the ruins of Tula, the absence of codices feels almost tangible, as though the missing pages stand beside you. Their gaps remind you that memory is fragile, that civilizations fade not only through broken stone, but through forgotten stories. A city may collapse, yet if its books endure, it continues to speak across centuries. The Toltec's half-lost library challenges us to lean closer, to listen with greater care. Perhaps this is their final gift, the reminder that knowledge gains its true value not from permanence, but from its ability to vanish, urging us never to take it for granted. You imagine one codex that might have existed, now lost, a painted book describing the gardens of Tula, the songs of children, the laughter of markets. Another might have held star charts, aligning the temples with constellations. Another, a philosophical dialogue, Piltson himself sketched beside a serpent, teaching that compassion could rival sacrifice. They are gone, yet in imagining them, you feel you participate in their preservation. Perhaps the Toltec intended this, that absence itself would invite imagination, keeping their culture alive, not through pages, but through longing. There is also a gentle irony. Codices were fragile, painted on materials vulnerable to fire, water, and time. Yet the oral tradition, intangible and unbound, often outlasted them. Stories spoken in kitchens and marketplaces endured where painted manuscripts perished. It is a reminder that sometimes the most ephemeral form of memory breath itself can outlive ink and stone. If knowledge were a race, maybe the spoken word keeps winning simply because it travels light dot as you leave the imagined library. You realize its shelves are not empty. They are filled with echoes, half-remembered songs, scattered symbols, faint outlines of serpents and stars. The Toltec library lives on in fragments, in Aztec manuscripts, in archaeological discoveries, in the puzzled joy of scholars who argue late into the night over what a single painted glyph might mean. It also lives in you, in your willingness to walk these ruins and imagine the books that once existed. You stop once more, letting your gaze drift upward. The stars above Tula glitter like inscriptions written in light, a vast cosmic codex no flame could ever destroy. Perhaps the Toltec, too, once looked to this eternal sky and felt reassurance, believing that even if painted books and fragile codices turned to ash, the heavens would continue to hold their stories. In that way, memory was never truly lost, only transformed, woven into the earth beneath their feet, the breath of their voices, and the shimmer of starlight dot as you step away from the ruins. A final thought lingers. Silence is not absence. It is a canvas, waiting for attention. It is a page that longs to be read, a library that endures not in shells, but in whispers, waiting to be remembered by those willing to pause and listen. In the heart of Tula, where stone temples rise like patient guardians of time, there once burned the flame that never closed its eyes. The Toltec believed fire was not merely warmth or light, but the living breath of the gods themselves. To keep it alive was to keep the world steady, to honor cycles of creation that stretched from dawn to eternity. So they fed a sacred flame day after day, year after year, until it became less an object of ritual and more a companion of life. Imagine stepping into the ceremonial plaza centuries ago. Torches flickered along the stairways, but one flame glowed brighter, steadier, untouched by weather or accident. Priests tended it constantly, carrying bundles of wood, resin, and copal to feed its hunger. Their movements were careful, almost tender, as if approaching a sleeping child. The air around the flame smelled of pine, herbs, and smoke that carried prayers upward. Each spark, each curl of smoke was considered a message, a whisper to the unseen. For the Toltec, this flame was not only an offering, but also a guardian of continuity. Life was fragile. Empires rose and fell, but as long as the sacred fire burned, balance remained intact. Crops would grow, rivers would flow, and the heavens would stay aligned. Extinguishing it, even by accident, was thought to invite chaos. One priest's negligence could mean famine, drought, or the anger of gods. So, they organized shifts, ensuring someone was always awake beside it. Day and night blurred into a single duty, to watch over the eternal blaze. Some later traditions suggest the Toltec sacred flame may have burned unbroken for decades, perhaps even centuries. Archaeologists point to scorched stone altars, their layers of ash and residue built slowly through countless offerings, blackened not by a single ritual, but by the weight of time itself. To imagine it is to picture extraordinary discipline. Generations of priests tending the fire as though carrying a baton, each life entrusted with the same task. Their devotion was not to a moment, but to continuity, to guarding a flame that was both older than they were and destined to outlast them. What fascinates historians is not only the fire's persistence, but the mystery of how it survived so long. Wood and resin alone might not suffice. Some propose that special techniques were used, pits designed to capture heat, mixtures of minerals to slow burning, or even hidden systems of airflow. None of this has been fully proven. The possibility that the Toltec mastered a ritual technology now forgotten adds another layer of intrigue. Was the flame simply sustained through human devotion, or did they unlock secrets of fuel and stone we no longer understand? The sacred fire also carried symbolic weight beyond survival. It represented the sun, the eternal cycle of day and night, rebirth and transformation. To watch the flame was to watch time itself, compressed into dancing light. Priests read omens in the way sparks rose or how smoke twisted in the air. A sudden shift in flame could be taken as a divine sign, a warning of drought, a promise of harvest, or a message of change. In this way, the fire was not only alive, but also articulate, a speaking oracle in constant motion. There were ceremonies built entirely around it. During festivals, people gathered with offerings, flowers, food, feathers, sometimes blood. They circled the flame, singing hymns that blended with the crackle of wood. The combination of sound and light must have been mesmerizing. Thousands of voices woven with fire's hiss, shadows dancing across temple walls, stars looking down in approval. Children grew up watching these rituals, associating fire with awe and comfort, perhaps never realizing how fragile its survival truly was. And yet, despite devotion, the eternal flame did not last forever. The decline of Tula brought disruption. At some point, perhaps during invasion or famine, the sacred fire was extinguished. No record tells us exactly when, only that the guardianship ended. Was it a sudden blow? Torches doused in panic as enemies breached the temple? Or was it quieter, the last priest too weary to fetch wood, watching the coals dim into ash? That moment, whether violent or tender, marked not just the end of a flame, but the collapse of continuity. For a people who saw fire as life, its death must have felt like the unraveling of the world itself. Today, only traces remain: burnt stone, blackened residues, faint whispers in Aztec memory. Yet even absence carries power. To know that a flame once burned without pause for decades is to feel its ghost. Standing in Tula at night, you might almost sense it still, a warmth that isn't there, a glow behind your eyelids, the imagined crackle of wood in silence. Some say memory itself is a kind of fire, fed not by fuel, but by attention. If that is true, then the Toltec flame never truly died. It has only changed hands, now burning in the minds of those who remember it. There is something deeply humbling in the thought of keeping a fire alive across generations. It echoes one of humanity's oldest dreams, the desire to continue, to endure, to pass something forward. We plant trees whose shade we may never sit beneath. We raise children who will see a future beyond us. We craft stories hoping they will outlast our voices. For the Toltec, the sacred fire embodied that same hope, glowing as a promise of continuity. Fragile yet persistent, it demanded care, patience, and faith. Its flame was more than light. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that eternity is not always forged in grand monuments, but often in the simplest act laying another stick upon glowing coals. Even in its ashes, the whisper remains. Constancy is devotion, and devotion, in time, becomes legacy. And so, the sacred fire that never slept becomes more than history. It becomes metaphor. It reminds us that within ruins, silence, and loss, there remains a spark. A civilization may vanish, but its flame can leap across centuries, waiting to be rekindled in new hands, new hearts. The night around Tula often belonged to stone and silence, but the river gave it another voice. It moved gently, a ribbon of silver beneath the moon, carrying with it the calm that only water can offer. Where stone remembered weight, water remembered motion. Together, they balanced the world of the Toltec, one unshakable, the other endlessly flowing. To the people of Tula, the river was not simply a source of water. It was a sacred presence, a living artery that nourished crops, rituals, and memory. Farmers drew from its currents to irrigate fields of maize, beans, and squash, while priests approached its banks for ceremonies that required purity and renewal. Children splashed along its edges, their laughter mingling with the soft rush of water, while elders whispered prayers to the reflection of the moon. On nights when the air was still, the river mirrored the sky so perfectly that it seemed a second universe lay beneath the surface. Stars doubled themselves, and the moon appeared whole, even when it was only a crescent. To kneel at the bank was to feel as though you were caught between two heavens, one above and one below. Priests often timed rituals to these reflections, believing that the gods traveled in both skies, the one of stars and the one of water. The sacred role of water reached far into daily and ceremonial life. During great festivals, bowls of river water were carried into plazas, sprinkled over fires and offerings, binding the elements together. Water blessed marriages, purified warriors, and healed the sick. Its sound accompanied chants. Its coolness marked transitions from one stage of life to another. The river was not only sustenance, but also language, speaking in ripples and currents, whispering messages that attentive ears might understand. Yet the river was also shaped by human hands. The Toltec engineered canals and aqueducts, guiding water into reservoirs and through agricultural fields. These works reveal both practicality and artistry. Channels aligned with slopes, lined with stones that resisted erosion, carefully balanced to prevent flooding. They turned the natural flow into a symphony of utility, ensuring that life in Tula could thrive even during dry seasons. Some of these waterways, faint and broken, still lace the land around the ruins, silent witnesses to an ancient mastery of hydrology. And yet, mystery lingers. Archaeologists have found channels whose construction defies easy explanation. Some cut through terrain in ways that suggest advanced surveying, while others carry traces of techniques not fully understood. Were these ceremonial channels meant not for crops, but for rituals aligning with stars or seasons? Or did the Toltec possess knowledge of water management more sophisticated than we give them credit for? The answers remain submerged, like stones hidden beneath rippling surfaces. Standing at the river's edge, you can imagine the rituals that once unfolded here. A priest dipping his hand into the water before ascending the steps of a temple. Women gathering clay jars, filled not just with water, but with blessing. Warriors washing their faces before battle, seeking clarity of sight. Each gesture was simple, yet each carried the weight of meaning, a dialogue with the divine. To touch the river was to touch eternity, for water had flowed long before the city rose, and would continue long after it fell. At night, the river carried music. The sound of drums and flutes from the city mingled with the steady murmur of water, creating a harmony that must have felt both human and eternal. The Toltec may have believed the river itself listened, its ripples recording the rhythms of celebration and sorrow alike. In the morning, fishermen would cast nets while the mist still clung to the surface, their movements blending practicality with ritual. Every act around the river seemed folded into a cycle of respect. It is said that some nights, torches were floated down the current during ceremonies, their flames reflecting on the water like stars breaking loose from the sky. Watching such a scene, one might have believed the river itself carried prayers downstream, delivering them to distant lands or hidden deities. Fire upon water, two opposites held in a fleeting embrace, must have reminded the Toltec that balance was the heart of life, but balance is fragile. When Tula declined, the river kept flowing, indifferent to the fate of its city. Fields went untended, canals fell into disrepair, ceremonies grew fewer. The water no longer reflected festivals of thousands, but only the sky itself. Perhaps this is why rivers often feel eternal. They outlast human noise, carrying fragments of civilizations in their currents. Somewhere downstream, pieces of Toltec pottery may still rest beneath silt, touched by the same waters that once blessed temples. Today, if you stand quietly, the river near Tula still carries that calm. The moon paints it in silver, the stars scatter across its surface, and the breeze makes ripples like lines of forgotten script. You cannot hear the chants anymore, but you can imagine them, layered softly into the water's memory. The canals, though broken, still guide your eyes, reminding you of hands that shaped earth with care. Though the Toltec themselves have vanished, and their ceremonies are no longer spoken aloud, the river endures, carrying both practical and sacred purpose. It waters the land, supports life, and yet its flowing surface mirrors the heavens, offering quiet reflection. In this duality, the river embodies lessons that outlast human presence. What nourishes the body can also nourish the spirit, and what seems ordinary can hold profound meaning. Watching its gentle currents, you sense that reflection itself, whether in water, in stone, or in memory, is a form of ritual, a quiet act that connects past and present, sustaining life and legacy together. As you leave the bank, you glance back once more. The water is still moving, calm and patient, carrying with it secrets of construction, echoes of prayer, and the quiet certainty that even civilizations are but brief visitors. The river remembers them all, not in words or codices, but in ripples that never repeat, yet always belong to the same flow. You walk once more into the wide plazas of Tula, and this time the air feels heavier. The stones are still here, the columns still stand, yet something within the silence has shifted. Where once you imagined processions, drums, and voices, you now sense absence, a pause too long to ignore. The city that once radiated life begins to reveal its quieter story, the slow unraveling of an empire that reached its height only to fade into shadows. Even the owl who once hooted nearby seems to have taken a vacation. By the 12th century, Tula's vitality had begun to fade. Plazas no longer thrummed with markets, and fields struggled to feed the growing population. Evidence suggests overpopulation and recurring crop failures during droughts. Even the Toltec's brilliant canals and riverworks could not fully tame nature. The sun, once a reliable blessing, became a harsh reminder that survival depended on more than ingenuity alone, and hunger quietly crept into daily life, reshaping the rhythm of the city. The decline was not only written in soil, but also in stone. Palaces and temples that once received constant attention began to show neglect. Roofs cracked, walls leaned, plazas grew dusty. You can almost see weeds daring to sprout between flagstones, the small rebellion of nature, reclaiming what had been ordered into symmetry. If vines had a sense of humor, they probably laughed as they crawled over once imposing walls. Silence replaced the rhythm of festivals, and corridors that echoed with music became little more than passageways for wind. Some scholars suggest that conflict accelerated Tula's decline. Evidence points to rival groups pressing against the city's walls and possible internal strife factions disputing leadership, rituals, or resources. In any society, unity can be fragile. A single sharp disagreement can ripple outward like cracks in clay. Picture Toltec leaders debating whether to continue blood sacrifices or follow Quetzalcoatl's gentler teachings. The argument may have seemed philosophical, but at its heart lay the survival of the people. If you've ever witnessed a family argue over dinner plans, you can imagine the tension multiplied at THOUSANDFOLD. Climate likely played a role as well. Signs of extended drought coincide with Tula's decline. Crops failed, famine spread, and restlessness followed. Migration may have begun not from conquest, but necessity, families carrying what they could in search of fertile land. Neighborhoods emptied, one home at a time, until plazas that once rang with laughter became silent stages, their echoes lingering long after the play had ended. And yet, the true cause remains elusive. Was it drought, war, internal strife, or a slow combination of them all? Historians lean in many directions, and perhaps no single answer will ever suffice. Civilizations rarely fall from one reason alone. Instead, they unravel like fabric, a loose thread here, a tear there, until one day the whole garment no longer holds. The mystery lingers, and perhaps it should, for certainty would rob the story of its quiet depth. You imagine walking through Tula in those years of decline. Markets would still stand, but fewer stalls would open. Children's games might still echo, but more faintly as families left. Temples would still hold ceremonies, yet fewer pilgrims arrived. The city did not collapse overnight. It dimmed slowly, like a fire running out of fuel. Embers glowed for a while, then cooled into ash. In its quiet fading, there is a strange dignity, as though Tula knew how to leave the stage without noise. Even today, the ruins carry an air of quiet departure, as if life simply paused and never resumed. Broken stairways suggest abandonment rather than violence, like someone stopped climbing midway and never returned. Statues remain upright yet weathered, guardians without a purpose, standing silently, as if respecting the emptiness around them. The impression is not of chaos or destruction, but of absence, a gentle hush left behind when a city moves on. One might imagine Tula leaving a note saying, "Gone wandering. Be back never." Later, the Aztec revered the Toltec as heirs to their wisdom and artistry. Tula became more than a fallen city. It embodied refinement, sacred knowledge, and cultural heritage. Even in decline, its story inspired generations. The irony is subtle but profound. Greatness need not survive physically, only echo loudly enough to stir imagination. In that way, Tula became perhaps more famous for vanishing than for existing, and history itself seems to have a playful sense of humor. Walking among the stones tonight, you sense how the ruins breathe differently. They carry no energy of markets or rituals, only acceptance and quiet endurance. Columns do not boast. Plazas hold their emptiness with dignity. Even decline, it seems, can be beautiful. You take a step back, letting your eyes sweep across the broad landscape. The night air cools your skin, and the faint shimmer of stars feels like a reminder that even as civilizations fade, the sky remains steady. Perhaps this is why the Toltec built with alignment to the heavens, not to control them, but to remind themselves that rise and fall are part of the same rhythm. Stone lasts longer than people, but even stone eventually bends to time. Still, the memory lingers. written not only in ruins, but also in the quiet awe of those who visit. The decline of Tula is not a story of failure, but of transition. People carried pieces of its knowledge outward, shaping cultures that followed. Aztec myths held Quetzalcoatl. Its art influenced new generations, and its memory became a symbol of wisdom. In that sense, Tula never truly ended. Like a river leaving its source, it spread quietly across the land, its influence still flowing, even after its city had grown still. And so you breathe deeply, letting the silence of this place wash over you. It is not empty silence. It is layered with centuries, with questions unanswered, with dignity intact. The ruins do not demand sorrow, only respect. Decline here feels less like a loss, and more like a soft whisper, reminding you that nothing lasts forever. And that is precisely what makes it beautiful. If permanence existed, even sunsets would grow boring. The palaces of Tula stand in silence now, their wide halls emptied of voices, their stone corridors open to the patient breath of wind. Once these buildings rose as the pride of the Toltec, the places where rulers received guests, where priests recited sacred words, where councils debated the fate of the city. Today they linger as vast shells, their grandeur softened by time, their stories reduced to whispers that drift with every gust. Walking here is like entering a dream that no one bothered to finish. Step inside one of these palaces, and you will feel it immediately. The air shifts, cooler than outside, as though the stones themselves have learned to trap shadows. Columns stretch upward, carved with designs that time has nibbled at, but not erased. In your imagination, the walls once shimmered with painted colors, red and blue, the pigments of ritual. Now they carry only faint traces, as though the stones blushed once and never quite recovered dot in these wide chambers. Leaders gathered not only to rule, but also to perform ceremonies. Archaeologists suggest that some rooms held important rituals, blending politics and religion in ways inseparable. To rule in Tula meant not just to govern the body of the city, but also to serve its soul. Imagine a grand hall filled with incense, with feathered banners swaying gently in torchlight, and with voices chanting hymns to Quetzalcoatl. Now replace those torches with shafts of moonlight, and the chant with the sound of your own footsteps. The transformation is eerie and strangely beautiful. The most intriguing parts of Tula's palaces lie in their hidden chambers. Excavations reveal storerooms filled with animal bones, shells, and artifacts that defy easy explanation. Were they sacred offerings, remnants of feasts, or symbolic tokens whose meanings are lost? Scholars can only speculate. Each discovery deepens the mystery, and despite careful study, the true purpose of these enigmatic objects may remain forever beyond our understanding. Imagine stumbling upon a room filled with deer bones, carefully arranged, or shells carried from coasts far away. What purpose could they have served? Ritual? Storage? Or perhaps the Toltecs simply had an unusual sense of interior decoration. Yes, this room is nice, but it really needs more jaguar femurs, one might joke. The mystery is serious, but allowing a hint of humor helps you face the truth. Time has erased explanations, and all we can do is speculate. The wind plays a role in this drama too. Wander down a stone hallway, and you may hear it moan gently, like the palace itself sighing in memory. Each corridor becomes a flute for the air, producing tones that echo and fade. At night, when the moon shines across broken thresholds, the sound seems almost like voices' soft conversations in a language you do not know. You pause, listen, and remind yourself it is only the wind. Still, you wonder. The palaces once hosted councils of rulers and warriors, deciding matters of alliance and defense. One chamber, broad and rectangular, was likely the gathering place of elite officials. Imagine them seated in rows, cloaks lined with feathers, eyes fixed on the speaker at the center. The debate might have been about war, trade, or the role of gods in daily affairs. The decisions made in these rooms shaped not only Tula, but much of central Mexico. Yet today, the seats are empty, the only audience a few wandering lizards, who probably care more about flies than politics. As decline swept the city, these palaces must have felt the change first. Fewer gatherings, fewer rituals, fewer banquets. The fires that once blazed in braziers burned less often, then not at all. Dust gathered where carpets once lay. Roof beams, once sturdy, creaked and broke. Stone slipped quietly from walls. Unlike temples, which still held sacred power even in fading times, palaces depended on people without rulers, officials, or priests. They became nothing more than stone boxes. The mystery of the stored bones and artifacts lingers like perfume in an empty room. Some scholars argue that the bones mark sacrificial rituals, symbolic offerings to ensure prosperity. Others suggest they were remnants of meals meant to honor the gods, stored with care to retain their sacred essence. A few whisper of darker possibilities, rituals now lost, meanings too strange for us to grasp. The fact remains, the palaces hide secrets in their silent chambers, secrets that resist the brightest lamp or the sharpest mind. Walking through, you may feel that the walls want to speak. They carry scratches, carvings, faint impressions of patterns that time has blurred. These are not merely decorations. They are memory etched in stone. But memory without translation becomes mystery, and mystery becomes myth. Perhaps that is the final fate of these palaces, not to reveal their truths, but to inspire endless wondering. Step outside again, and you will see how the palaces blend back into the landscape. Hills rise beyond, trees whisper nearby, the sky spreads wide. The buildings do not dominate as they once did. Instead, they seem to rest, content with being ruins. The wind continues to travel their corridors, carrying echoes that sound suspiciously like laughter at times. If stones could chuckle, perhaps these do, amused at how seriously we humans take their puzzles. The abandoned palaces of Tula do not ask for pity. They do not mourn their silence. They simply remain, their dignity intact, their mysteries preserved. To walk among them is to step into a space where the boundary between known and unknown blurs. You are visitor and witness, part intruder, part guest. The palaces seem to say, we were once alive with voices. Now we are alive with silence. Both are forms of life. And so you leave, the corridors behind you humming faintly with wind. You carry with you the image of halls once filled with power, now filled with questions. It is a reminder that even the grandest places, once emptied, find a second life in mystery. Palaces without kings, without councils, without feasts, still endure as teachers. Their lesson is gentle. Everything fades, but in fading, new meaning emerges. Long after the fires of Tula dimmed and the grand plazas stood empty, the city did not vanish. Stones may crumble, but stories have wings, and they do not need walls to survive. The Toltec may have laid down their tools and left their palaces, but the wind carried their voices farther than any army could march. Those who came later than Mexica, whom we know as the Aztec, picked up these whispers and turned them into songs, myths, and guiding principles. In this way, Tula never truly ended. It simply changed form, slipping from stone into story. Travelers and merchants carried fragments of tales like seeds. A carving of a feathered serpent glimpsed in a ruin became a reminder of Quetzalcoatl. A description of a ceremony performed under the stars grew into a legend retold in marketplaces miles away. With every retelling, details shifted, but the essence remained. The Toltec were remembered as masters of art, wisdom, and sacred knowledge. So powerful was this reputation that the word Toltec itself began to mean more than just a people. It became a synonym for culture, refinement, and mastery. To be called Toltec was not just to belong to a tribe. It was to embody a tradition of wisdom not among the Aztec. This idea crystallized into something profound, Toltecaetl. The word translates loosely as the Toltec way, or the art of living. Imagine an entire philosophy condensed into a single concept. To practice Toltecaetl was to strive for balance between knowledge and action, beauty and duty, discipline and creativity. It was not merely about ruling cities or building temples. It was about shaping the soul. This was perhaps the most enduring gift of Tula, not its stones or palaces, but its reminder that life itself can be practiced as an art, picture, and art. Aztec elder teaching young apprentices in a calm courtyard. He points not to a sword or shield, but to a painted codex. This, he says, is what the Toltec left us. Not only weapons, but wisdom. To be Toltec is to craft your life as carefully as a jeweler sets turquoise into gold. The apprentices nod, though one of them is probably wishing wisdom also came with free lunch. The elder smiles knowingly. Even humor has its place in philosophy. The legends of Toltec Quetzalcoatl also survived the Fall of Tula, growing brighter with each telling. In some versions, he was the wise king who forbade human sacrifice, preferring offerings of flowers and song. In others, he was a divine figure, a feathered serpent who promised to return one day from across the sea. The Aztec wove these tales into their own cosmology, blending memory with prophecy. It is difficult to say where history ended and myth began, but perhaps that was never the point. For people who lived by the rhythm of stars and rituals, myth was simply another kind of truth. Winds carried not only grand myths, but also smaller stories, the kind whispered by grandmothers to children, or traded by merchants in noisy markets. Some told of palaces where laughter once echoed, others of rivers that mirrored the moon. There were even humorous tales, like the one of a Toltec sculptor who supposedly carved a jaguar so realistic that a visiting merchant tried to feed it meat. Did that really happen? Probably not. But the story persisted, and that persistence itself was a kind of truth. The Toltec were remembered as artists so skilled that their works fooled the eye and stirred the heart. Archaeologists today uncover fragments of these narratives in codices and oral traditions. A scroll painted centuries after Tula's fall shows a procession of figures carrying banners marked with Toltec symbols. Another describes Quetzalcoatl teaching people to craft jewelry and write poetry. Even when filtered through Aztec memory, the core message remains clear. The Toltec legacy was not just political, but deeply cultural. They were remembered as givers of knowledge, shapers of beauty, and guardians of wisdom. The mystery lies in how much of this memory reflects reality. Were the Toltec truly the philosopher-artists later generations claimed them to be? Or did the Aztec, seeking roots for their own greatness, project an idealized vision backward into the past? Historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that the Toltec were indeed a mighty empire, disciplined and cultured. Others suggest that Tula was simply one city among many, elevated into legend by Aztec imagination. The truth likely lies somewhere between. But here again, perhaps the answer matters less than the effect. Myth, once believed, shapes reality as surely as fact. Imagine standing in a quiet plaza of ruined Tula, the wind brushing through broken columns. Close your eyes, and you might hear it, the faint murmur of voices carried from centuries ago. The wind does not tell you whether these people were kings, priests, or poets. It only tells you that they lived, they dreamed, and they left something behind. Whether history remembers them as conquerors or philosophers, the essence of Toltecaetl remains: to live as though life itself is a craft, an art shaped by every decision. The Aztecs certainly believed this. They described the Toltec not only as builders, but as model humans, people who had mastered balance. To them, Toltec wisdom was like a compass, pointing toward a way of being that valued both discipline and joy. It was said that the true Toltec knew how to weave flowers into words, how to make music of the heart, how to see the world not as chaos, but as a pattern. That ideal lived on, long after the palaces of Tula grew quiet, and so the stories continued, carried by wind, written in codices, whispered in ceremonies, sung in marketplaces. Tula, once a city of stone, became a city of memory. Even as centuries passed, its name remained synonymous with wisdom and art. The fact that we still speak of it now, wondering about its mysteries, is proof that the wind did its job well. The Toltec may have vanished from their palaces, but their voices still travel. All you have to do is listen when the wind moves through ruins. It might be telling you how to live. There is a peculiar kind of silence in stories that wait for fulfillment. Legends do not merely describe the past. Sometimes they lean forward, pointing toward a future yet to arrive. Among the many tales carried from Tula into the Aztec world, none held greater weight than the belief that Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, would one day return. His departure was mourned, his absence explained with promises, and his image polished until it gleamed like prophecy itself. The Aztec inherited this vision and cherished it like a treasure passed through generations. According to their accounts, Quetzalcoatl had once walked the earth as both king and god, teaching humans the arts of poetry, agriculture, and knowledge. But he departed eastward, across the waters, promising to return in a time yet unnamed. From that absence grew expectation, and from expectation, prophecy. The east became not just a direction, but a doorway. Every sunrise felt like a reminder. Perhaps today, the Feathered Serpent will step once more onto the shore. Imagine the impact of such a belief. Every morning, the Aztec looked toward the horizon with reverence. The sun's ascent was not just light returning. It was Quetzalcoatl rehearsing his entrance. Priests repeated the tale, weaving it into calendars and ceremonies. Children grew up hearing that one day the gentle god would return to restore harmony. Skeptics may have existed, but even doubt cannot erase the power of hope when it is stitched into the fabric of a culture god. And then, in the early 16th century, strangers appeared on the eastern coast of Mexico. They came not as shimmering deities, but as exhausted men in metal armor, stepping from ships with banners and horses. Hernan Cortes and his companions could not have looked more different from the Quetzalcoatl of myth. No feathers, no serpent scales, and certainly no divine aura after weeks at sea. Yet their timing collided eerily with the cycles of Aztec prophecy. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had Quetzalcoatl returned? The debate over this moment has fascinated historians for centuries. Did the Aztec truly believe Cortes was the returning Feathered Serpent? Or was this idea born later, shaped by European chroniclers seeking to dramatize conquest? Some suggest that Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor, hesitated not because he believed Cortes was divine, but because he was a cautious strategist, weighing possibilities. Others argue that fragments of prophecy had indeed primed the Aztec to interpret new arrivals through the lens of myth. Either way, history blurred into legend in ways both uncanny and tragic. Consider the strangeness of it. A story that began in Tula, whispered through centuries, may have influenced one of the most pivotal encounters in the Americas. If Quetzalcoatl had been a purely historical king, long forgotten, the Spaniards might have faced only swords at their landing. But because Quetzalcoatl also lived as a myth, his return lingered like a shadow across events. Even if the prophecy was partly invention, its existence in European texts shaped how the conquest was remembered. A myth once meant to inspire hope became entangled with conquest and loss. Step back from history, and the tale still feels alive. Imagine standing by the Gulf of Mexico, the waves rising and falling like breaths of a giant serpent. The horizon glows with the orange of dawn, and you can almost picture a figure sailing toward you, feathers catching the first rays of sun. For the Aztec, this vision was not mere poetry, but possibility. The east was always a threshold, and every ship, every cloud, every glimmer of light carried the weight of a question. Is this the moment of return? Yet myths are not static. They adapt. Even today, the story of Quetzalcoatl's return continues to echo. Some see it as a metaphor for the resilience of cultural memory, others as a reminder of how easily hope can be misread. The idea of return of wisdom lost and then restored is powerful enough to transcend centuries. Whether in Tula's ruins or modern Mexico, the feathered serpent remains a symbol of cycles, disappearance, waiting, renewal. Of course, the humor in all of this is hard to ignore. Imagine Quetzalcoatl himself watching the events of 1519 from some divine balcony. Really? You mistook that guy for me? He might chuckle, shaking his feathered head. Courts, no doubt, was flattered by the association. But the mismatch between the mythic serpent bird god and a weary conquistador with a questionable haircut is almost comical. History, it seems, has a taste for irony. Still, the seriousness returns when you realize how fragile societies can be when stories are interpreted in urgent times. The prophecy, whether ancient truth or later invention, illustrates the immense power of narrative. Belief, even in whispers, can bend the path of empires. And in this case, it blurred the line between legend and invasion, between the hope of a returning god and the reality of foreign conquest. Historians continue to argue, their pens scratching like wind through ruins. Was the prophecy authentic, or a clever postscript added by chroniclers to explain the bewildering fall of the Aztec? The answer may never be final, but perhaps that is fitting. Quetzalcoatl himself was always both king and god, real and myth, feather and serpent. His return, then, could never be simple fact. It was destined to remain mystery, always open, always unfinished, and so the wind carries the story still. In markets, in classrooms, in casual jokes about gods returning late, the prophecy lives on. Whether believed or doubted, it has become part of the rhythm of memory. Tula may have vanished as a city, but through this myth, its influence stretched all the way into one of history's turning points. That is no small feat for a legend that began with a whisper. The east still glows every morning, as it always did. The horizon still invites the imagination to see ships, serpents, or gods. And somewhere in that light, the feathered serpent still waits, not as a conqueror, but as a reminder. Stories once told never truly leave. They sail with the wind, return with the dawn, and shape the way we see even strangers on the shore. You walk slowly as evening deepens, and the ruins of Tula soften beneath the moon. The stones do not shout their history. They whisper, inviting careful listening. Shadows stretch across the plaza like fingers of memory. The statues of Atlantean warriors rise in solemn silhouette, helmets catching pale light. They feel less like monuments than companions watching the night with you. If statues charge rent for stargazing, these would surely collect in silence. The air carries a cool dryness, a faint sweetness from flowers long offered or incense carried on the wind centuries ago. The stillness is almost complete, punctuated by your steps crunching gravel or a distant night bird. The city may be in ruins, but the night grants it a new kind of life, one, not of markets or rituals, but of enduring presence. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of a place that has waited patiently for 1,000 years. Above, the sky stretches endlessly, stars brighter than most city dwellers ever see. The moon hangs generously over collapsed halls and broken stairways. From a distance, columns and statues seem alive, shifting in the flicker of light. You know the stone cannot move, yet the illusion feels deliberate. Perhaps the Toltec builders intended this nightly performance. If so, They saved on theater tickets. Stopping before the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, you notice how night transforms it. Stairs appear as ribbons of shadow, and serpents carved along edges seem to glide beneath moonlight, their scales catching glimmers that feel almost alive. You imagine priests climbing these steps under the same stars, carrying flowers, incense, or silent prayers. The air hums quietly, as if the night itself listens. Modern archaeology preserves these ruins, and by day visitors walk the plazas, study carvings, and gaze at the warrior statues. By night, however, stories belong to imagination. Many who linger after sunset report an atmosphere beyond measurement, faint sounds, rustling echoes, whispers that slip through corridors like unseen travelers. Some hear chanting or hollow drumbeats carried by the wind. Whether illusion, imagination, or the echo of centuries, these tales have become part of Tula's living memory. You tilt your head, half expecting to hear one of these sounds yourself. The breeze rises, and a faint rustle reaches your ears, stone shifting, grass stirring, or something else entirely. You smile, thinking the city enjoys teasing those who listen too closely. If ruins could laugh, they might chuckle at how humans chase mysteries like cats leaping at dust motes. Moonlight illuminates carvings of serpents, jaguars, and eagles along fallen walls, their shapes blurred by time into something half real, half dream. Centuries of erosion have softened edges, yet the essence persists. You imagine torch-lit hands chiseling for God's eyes, and feel the layered silence walls, statues, and fragments heavy with lives, prayers and celebrations, keeping the ruins quietly alive. A gust sweeps the plaza, and imagined torches flicker brighter. Statues lean subtly, columns stretch taller tricks of light, yet comforting. For a moment, you are part of the story, walking where countless others have walked, hearing what they might have heard. If memory handed out guest passes, tonight you hold one. You pause to look at the stars, shining with the same brilliance observed by the Toltec, the Aztec, and travelers over centuries. Constellations remain unchanged, a steady contrast to the shifting ruins below. Empires rise and fall, yet the heavens continue with gentle patience. The thought soothes. Human stories change, but the universe endures. As the night deepens, you wander across the plaza once more. Statues remain still, shadows long and protective. The wind whispers softly, and this time you do not interpret it. You let it pass, brushing against your skin like soft fabric. The ruins do not demand understanding. They offer rhythm, a silent companionship. Your presence becomes a note in a long song, comforting in its brevity. The pyramid steps glow faintly in moonlight, serpents etched along their edges. You imagine generations of priests climbing them, carrying offerings or prayers, footsteps echoing faintly against stone. The air feels charged with memory, a subtle hum at the edge of hearing. Though the ceremonies have long ended, the energy remains, folded into the night itself. Looking around, you notice how the city balances function and poetry. Walls hold weight, yet guide the eye upward. Columns are strong, yet draw attention to myth. Each structure insists on both practicality and meaning. Perhaps this blend of sacred and ordinary is why Tula flourished. Its people did not separate daily life from devotion, instead weaving them together, finding significance in every step, every gesture, every sunrise. You pass broken stairways and weathered statues, reminders of absence rather than destruction. The city seems to have departed politely, leaving quiet behind instead of chaos. The Aztec revered Tula as a model of refinement, wisdom, and artistry. Even in decline, the city inspired. Sometimes being remembered does not require survival, only echoes strong enough to stir imagination. The ruins breathe acceptance, calm, and quiet beauty. Even decline has grace. Pausing beneath a tall column, You sense the vastness of Tula's memory. Shadows stretch like the ocean, ancient and beyond measure. Stones whisper of worlds older than clocks, measured by constellations. You picture countless generations gazing upward, hoping for meaning. Humor endures. To a stumble on these stairs long ago, a whispered joke, connecting centuries through simple humanity. You stop at the pyramid's base, noticing how serpents and other carvings shimmer under moonlight. Their life seems suspended between reality and dream. You breathe, matching the city's rhythm. Time stretches here, deliberate and slow. Stones, shadows, whispers, they insist. Pause, listen, let the modern world's weight drift away. The night over Tula is not about proving history or solving mysteries. It is about sharing silence with stone, sky, and memory. Finally, you rest. The moon, stars, ruins, and whispers fold together in quiet companionship. The city does not need to shout. It simply endures, patient and calm. This silence is not emptiness. It is a luxury, a reminder that even in decay, memory persists. If silence were sold in bottles, Tula would hold the finest vintage. You walk along the pathways of Tula, where fragments of carved stones lie scattered, each one carrying whispers of old stories. The carvings are not loud. They do not scream their meaning across the centuries. Instead, they sit patiently, waiting for someone willing to look closely. Some stones lie broken, their patterns incomplete, while others still bear entire images, snakes curling in elegant lines, eagles stretching their wings, jaguars crouching in silent strength. They are not just decorations. They are messages carved into the skin of the city, reminders of how the Toltec understood life, power, and the divine. The serpent appears often, twisting across pillars and fragments of walls. Its curves are smooth, flowing like water, suggesting both danger and wisdom. In Toltec and later Aztec traditions, the serpent was never just a snake. It was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, symbol of creation, knowledge, and transformation. Each carving, no matter how weathered, seems to ripple with quiet energy. Standing before one, you almost feel the movement of scales, a whisper of wings, as if the stone itself had chosen to remember flight. If stones ever took flying lessons, these serpents clearly graduated with honors. Nearby, an eagle spreads its wings across a block of stone. The feathers are etched with careful precision, still visible despite centuries of wind and rain. The eagle was a creature of the sky, a hunter that saw everything from above. For the Toltec, it carried the essence of the sun and the strength of warriors. Some carvings show eagles clutching serpents, a dance of sky and earth, spirit and wisdom. Standing before such an image, you sense the tension and balance the artists wanted to capture. It is more than art. It is philosophy made visible, and perhaps also proof that the Toltec were very committed to keeping their sketchbooks dramatic. The jaguar appears, too, muscles tensed in stone, teeth bared as if ready to leap from its slab. The jaguar lived in the shadows of forests, feared and admired for its silent power. For the Toltec, it was a symbol of the night, of hidden strength, of warriors who moved unseen. Looking at its carving, you almost hear the soft pad of paws on earth, the steady patience of a predator. The stone does not roar, but it waits, just as the jaguar once waited in the jungle. If cats have 9 lives, the jaguar seems to have at least 9 centuries preserved here. Together, serpent, eagle, and jaguar form a triad of meanings: earth and sky, wisdom and power, sun and night. They show how the Toltec wove the natural world into their myths, how every creature carried a piece of divine truth. These animals were not just admired. They were believed to carry energy that shaped rituals, battles, and prayers. When you look at the carvings, you are not just looking at animals, you are looking at fragments of a worldview, a philosophy etched in stone rather than written in books. Archaeologists have studied these carvings for decades, cataloging patterns, noting styles, comparing them to later Aztec imagery. Many agree that the stones confirm the deep influence of the Toltec across Mesoamerica. Yet some carvings do not fit so neatly. A few show styles unusual for the region designs that look more like they belong to distant lands, far from central Mexico. Scholars debate whether these are signs of trade, migration, or imagination. Were the Toltec influenced by cultures beyond their reach? Or did their ideas travel outward, reshaping the world far beyond Tula's borders? The stones do not answer, of course. They simply hold their silence, and perhaps laugh at our eagerness to solve puzzles that were never carved for us. You lean closer to one fragment, tracing the grooves with your eyes. The lines are so deliberate, so careful, that you cannot help but imagine the carver at work, chisel in hand, steady breath, eyes fixed on the design. Perhaps he worked at dawn, catching the soft light that revealed each detail. Perhaps he paused often, stepping back to see the animal emerge from the stone. The work was not rushed. It could not be. Each strike of the tool was a choice, a promise that the image would endure long after flesh had faded. If patience were currency, these carvers would have been the wealthiest in town. The carvings serve not just as images, but as memory anchors. In a culture where oral tradition preserved most knowledge, each stone guided recollection. A serpent might spark tales of Quetzalcoatl. An eagle recall battles beneath the sun. A jaguar summons stories of night-cloaked warriors. By day, they are static. By night, moonlight seems to animate them. The serpent glides, the eagle soars, the jaguar prowls. Some visitors sense a faint hum, echoes of long-past chants. Whether real or imagined, the effect endures. The stones remember, they listen, and occasionally they whisper back. They remind us that memory can be stronger than words. That stone, though silent, carries life within its carved forms. The foreign-looking carvings hold their own mystery. Some stones show waves, spirals, or human figures in unfamiliar styles. Did travelers from distant lands leave them? Or were they experiments of local artists pushing boundaries? Scholars debate, tourists wonder, and the puzzle endures, because ruins are generous with questions. Stepping back, you take in the plaza. Broken, scattered, incomplete stones still radiate meaning. Even fragments carry power. Even cracks can speak. The serpent, eagle, and jaguar remain guardians of stories, teachers in silence, companions for anyone willing to pause and truly listen. Mystery, it seems, is eternal dot as you prepare to leave. You glance one last time at a serpent curling along a weathered block. Its lines are softened, but unmistakable. It feels less like an image and more like a reminder that stories live not only in words, but in textures, in grooves, in quiet persistence. You smile, realizing that the stones do not simply preserve Toltec memory, they also invite you to add your own. If memory had a guest book, these carvings would be the pages, and every gaze would be a signature. The night over Tula is not heavy, nor is it empty. It breathes quietly, like an old friend who no longer needs words to be understood. The ruins lie in patient silence, their stones softened by centuries of wind and rain. Grass grows gently between cracks in the plaza, weaving green threads into gray blocks. The statues of the Atlantean warriors still stand, their shadows stretching long under the pale light of the moon. They no longer hold weapons that inspire fear. Instead, they carry the dignity of guardians who chose to remain even after the people who carved them had gone. The river nearby flows with unhurried grace. Its surface catches the silver of the stars, breaking it into shimmering fragments that drift with the current. You can almost hear the river sigh, as though it remembers both the laughter and the tears once carried along its banks. Long ago, water from this river sustained rituals, gardens, and daily life. Now it sustains memory itself, carrying whispers from stone to sky, from past to present. It is not loud, but neither is it forgotten. The plaza, once full of chants, drums, and firelight, now holds only the music of wind. Breezes slip through broken corridors, brushing against columns, bending around carvings of serpents, eagles, and jaguars. Each gust sounds like a phrase in a language too ancient to translate, and yet you understand. This place is still alive, even in its stillness. The walls do not collapse into silence. They hum softly with echoes, as if refusing to surrender their stories completely. The Toltec city that once rose in brilliance during the 10th to 12th centuries is gone. Its temples are worn, its markets long closed, its voices scattered into dust. Yet its influence did not vanish. The Aztec, centuries later, would claim inheritance of Toltec wisdom, weaving its legends into their own. Toltec, the art of living with balance, skill, and beauty, became more than a cultural memory. It became philosophy, a compass that guided new generations. The Toltec spirit did not vanish into ruins. It traveled forward, carried by those who believed memory was not something buried, but something planted. Among the stories that linger, most vividly is the legend of Quetzalcoatl. Some said he was a god. Others said he was once a wise king who became more than human. The story tells of his departure. Ashamed by betrayal or bound by destiny, Quetzalcoatl left Tula. He did not vanish into shadow, but rose with light, stepping onto a raft woven of serpents and fire. With the river as his path and the sky as his witness, he drifted eastward, promising to return one day. Some claim the fire reflected on the water, painting the night in streaks of crimson and gold. Others insist that he flew, carried by the winds themselves. The details differ, but the feeling remains. He did not die, he departed. Departure, after all, is simply another form of endurance. The Atlantean statues seem to know this story well. Their stone eyes, fixed toward the horizon, look like they are still waiting. Guardians of memory, they stand as if expecting their Lord's return, unblinking, unwavering. To walk among them is to feel the weight of patience, to realize that centuries mean little to stone. Perhaps they whisper silently to the wind, "He will come back." And the wind, always polite, carries that whisper into the night sky. The ruins themselves embody the paradox of endings. Tula is gone, and yet it remains. Each wall, each carving, each stair that leads nowhere still holds fragments of meaning. The silence is not absence, but fullness. You can almost imagine that if you sat long enough in the plaza, the city would rise again around you, its buildings reconstructed in memory, its markets buzzing, its temples glowing with fire. Time does not rebuild stone, but memory rebuilds experience, and in that sense, Tula has never truly fallen. The legend of Quetzalcoatl's return endured long after Tula fell. The Aztec believed he would one day return from the east, bringing wisdom, renewal, and balance. When foreign ships arrived centuries later, some wondered if the prophecy had come true. Historians still debate whether this belief was genuine or later shaped, yet the story's power is clear. A tale can bend choices, blur myth and reality, and leave influence long after events fade. Walking through Tula at night, silence, stone, and story converge. The river hums, wind carries whispers, and statues keep eternal watch. Amid it all, you sense Quetzalcoatl's final whisper, not a sound, but a presence, reminding you that departures are not endings, and that influence persists long after cities vanish. Now, as you let these ruins settle in your thoughts, imagine the wind softening into a lullaby. The river flows not to hurry you, but to carry away the noise of the day. The stone warriors remain in silence, watching over you with patience, asking nothing, expecting nothing. They stand so that you may rest, so that the weight of centuries reminds you that tonight you do not need to carry anything at all. Let your breath follow the river's current, slow, steady, unbroken. Inhale as the wind glides through the corridors. Exhale as the moonlight rests on the carvings. Each breath becomes a step away from the restless mind and closer to stillness. You are not asked to remember, not asked to solve, only invited to be present in this quiet. Think of Quetzalcoatl, who left not in despair but in promise. His departure was not an end, but a gentle assurance. Some stories wait, some returns take time. And just as the statues wait, you too may rest, knowing that what is important will find its way back in its own moment. Let the night hold you the way. The ruins hold memory, without judgment, without hurry. You are safe here, among patient stones, among whispers that ask nothing of you but calm. Close your eyes. Let go. The city sleeps, and so may you. Good night. Sleep well. Until we meet again.